Okay, hi all, and some of you may have seen my recent photograph of some lightning. Now, normally at this time of year we have quite a few nights with lightning storms, but they've been a bit few and far between recently. So it got me thinking that if they're on their way back, I could give you a few tips as to how to get some decent lightning strikes relatively easily. Of course, you could try this with an iPhone, but the chances are it's going to be more luck than judgment. And if you do manage to sort of squeeze one in, you're going to be sort of certainly found out when it comes to quality, especially with not lightning shots taken at night. So in truth, you're going to need a camera like an SLR or mirrorless camera where you can control the shutter and the aperture, etc., to get the shot you need. Okay. So here are a few tips, and as usual, I'll be available for any questions afterwards through messages, etc. But let's find out the easiest way for you to go and get some cracking lightning shots. Okay, so tip number one is basically to stay safe. Okay, by very definition, you are going to be outside with lightning. Okay, and we all know the risks associated with that. Okay, so don't take unnecessary chances for the shot. If you can get shade, you can get cover, and keep yourself well away. You don't have to be right on top of it. We're not discussing storm chasing here, but just take some sensible precautions and make sure that you do whatever's in your power to stay safe. Okay, tip number two is about the time of day to take your lightning shots. Now, obviously at night they're much more impactful, but you can take lightning shots at any time during the day. However, if it's bright or if it's dawn or dusk, you are going to have to keep adjusting those settings, and you're not going to get the long exposures, which will make your life easier. So for the sake of this particular sort of tips section, okay, we're going to assume that you're going to take these photographs when it is really dark. That way you're going to get a consistency of light, even if you're photographing for half an hour or an hour, and the results are going to be simpler to achieve. Okay. So tip number three is about the composition, okay? Don't lose sight of good composition, even if the lighting is all around you and it looks impressive in its own right. By adding a tree or something else in the foreground that gives that kind of depth, then you're going to make the picture so much more impactful when there's lightning surrounding it. Okay, so for this next tip, we're on to equipment, okay? And you are going to need a tripod. Okay, so if you haven't already got one, go and get yourself one. Okay, so for lightning, you're going to be using long exposures, and the camera needs to be steady and fixed and doesn't want to be moved throughout the number of different exposures you're going to take. The other useful thing to have is a remote trigger. Okay, so you can get cable triggers like I have, or you can get wireless triggers, but something where your hand is away from the camera when you press the shutter, so there's no shake at the moment you push the shutter down. Right, and in terms of lenses, okay, you can pretty much use any lens within reason, okay, but probably for starting out you want to be kind of get a nice wide angle lens, because you don't know exactly where the lightning's going to be, and the wide angle lens will give you the catchment area that you're looking for. That's not to say that you can't use a long telephoto lens and focus on a particular point. There may be TV aerials in the distance, or a tower, or a certain really interesting building, and you're hopeful that the lightning is going to be impacted by that, but you are narrowing the area with your fingers crossed that that lightning is going to be seen. And if you've taken it wide and you've managed to capture lightning over there or over there, then you can always crop that down afterwards. Okay, so we've got the camera on a tripod, we have a remote trigger, and we're ready to go. A couple of things in preparation. The first thing is that you're going to need to manually focus, okay, because assuming that it's dark, okay, if you're using autofocus, a camera can't see a particular point to focus on unless there's a distant light. So if there's a distant light on a hill or something like that, then focus on that, get your focus, and then you're going to need to switch to manual focus on your lens. The reason we do this is because we want the camera set at one focus, which we can guarantee throughout all the subsequent exposures. We don't want the camera attempting to try and focus or refocus, because at some point you're just not going to get any focus at all. The next thing as well is if your lens has image stabilization, you need to turn it off. Okay, so the image stabilization works with the lens when you're moving around, so it's creating its own sense of movement in order to keep that balance of you moving and lens moving. When it's fixed on the tripod, which it will be while we're doing this exercise, okay, it could work against you and actually make the image a bit soft. So switch that image stabilization off if you've got it. Okay, and finally on the preparation front, make sure your camera is set to shoot in RAW, okay? When it comes to any post-production needs like changing the color balance or the white balance or increasing some of the light from the shadows, RAW is going to give you the best opportunity to get more detail from your image. Okay, so finally, what are the settings that you need your camera to be on? So the first thing to keep in mind is that you really need to be shooting in manual. Okay, if you rely on one of the auto or semi-auto modes, your camera is going to be exposing for what is effectively a dark scene in front of you, and it's going to do everything it can to brighten everything up. Now, when a lightning strike happens in the middle of that shutter exposure, you're going to be overexposed significantly. So you need to basically make sure the camera isn't making the decisions for you. Okay, so setting one would be have your ISO on the lowest possible number. Generally that's 100, some cameras go down to 50. Okay, you don't want that to be over sensitive, so you want it to be the lowest sensitivity to light, so get your ISO down to the lowest dial on your camera. Okay, so in terms of the aperture, okay, that's the camera's pupil, you want that down to about f8 to around about f11, okay? That will restrict the amount of light coming into the camera and will allow you to get shutter times, exposure times, if you like, of around about 15 to 30 seconds. Okay, so there's another alternative to the manual mode, which is in itself a manual mode, but that's called the bulb mode. Okay, now whereas you may get a setting in manual which allows you that 15, 20, 30 second exposure with a decent aperture, with the bulb mode you are actually controlling how open your shutter is. You can hold the button down on your remote trigger and the camera or shutter will stay open for as long as you like. So again, this is something I do quite regularly. I have the remote trigger, I have the aperture set around f9.5, f11, something like that, and just press it and leave it open for the same period, 20 to 30 seconds. Okay, so if during that 15, 20, 30 second period there's been no lightning strikes, then just close the shutter and start again, okay? It's best that you maintain a consistent level of exposure during this process, whether it takes 10 minutes or an hour for you to get these shots taken. If the lightning happens in the first 2 or 3 seconds that the shutter is open, it's going to be captured terrific. But don't shut it down at that point, because then you've only had a 3 or 4 second exposure and the overall ambience of the scene is going to be much darker. If you allow it to go too long, then it'll be much brighter. Now this is really useful if you want to blend or stack lightning shots at the end. So if you've got 10 shots, half of them are really dark, half of them are really bright, it's going to make the stacking process a lot more difficult for you to edit in post-production. Right, so let's be realistic. You are going to get lots of shots of utter darkness, but that's all right. That's part of the fun, okay? So just go and grab a beer and sit there and watch the storm and keep your finger on the trigger, keep those shots coming, and over the course of a time you will get some cracking lightning shots. In terms of post-production, okay, there are some tweaks that you can do. You can certainly increase like textures and contrast and white balance and those sort of things to make things look more dramatic. But I always find that generally with lightning, if you've captured it and got these settings right in the first place, it looks pretty damn good straight out of the camera. Okay, so that's about it. So all the photographs I've shown you here, which I have taken, have all adopted these principles. Of course, patience plays a part, and being in the right place at the right time. But again, just emphasis on the safety. I'm fortunate enough to have a high point at the front of the house, and the storms roll in from the west. So quite frequently throughout the year, I can just set up on my own front deck and not go anywhere. But if you are going outdoors, again, be very, very careful. All right, guys, once again, any questions for me about this or any other sort of aspects of lightning shots like during the day or at dawn or dusk, just drop me a message and I'll be glad to help. In the meantime, stay safe. Good luck with getting some lightning shots out there now that the summer storms are approaching, and I will speak to you all soon. Take care. Bye.